It was a chilly October night, and I was out on my private dock by the Hudson River, just casting my line into the pitch-black water. The wood creaked under my feet, and the sharp autumn air was already bleeding into my bones. Over my head, a thin crescent moon tried to cut through the heavy clouds, throwing ghost-like light across the dark ripples. This had become my daily ritual. Every evening, weather permitting, I'd head down here with my fishing rod, a thermos of black coffee, and the suffocating solitude that had been my shadow for 3 long years. My name is Robert Mitchell. I'm 68 years old, and I've been a widower since August of 2020. That was the month I lost Catherine, my wife of 35 years, my best friend, the woman who gave purpose to every single day I was alive. The doctors called it a car accident. Slick roads, bad visibility. She was driving home from the grocery store when her car skidded into a utility pole. Just like that, she was gone. No warning, no goodbye. I can still see the officer standing on my front porch, hat in hand, saying the words I couldn't swallow. "I'm so sorry, Mr. Mitchell. We did everything we could." 3 years later, I still found myself setting out 2 coffee cups in the morning. At night, I'd reach across the bed, reaching for her hand, only to touch cold sheets. The massive house where we raised our son, where we threw birthday parties and celebrated decades of life, just felt way too big, way too quiet. Fishing helped pass the time. Not because I cared about catching anything, I almost always threw them back, but because it gave my hands something to do. It gave me an excuse to step away from the heavy silence of that empty house. I could still see Catherine in every room, dancing out of key in the kitchen to old Motown records, curling up on the sofa with her feet tucked under my legs, tending to the roses that kept blooming summer after summer, even after she wasn't there to tend them anymore. God, we were happy. Then she was gone. A soft tug on the line pulled me back to reality. I reeled it in slowly, mostly out of habit. A small bass, nothing to brag about. I carefully unhooked it and slipped it back into the dark water. "Stay safe out there," I muttered. It was a little habit I'd picked up. Catherine used to laugh at me for talking to the fish. "You know they can't hear you, right?" she'd say, her eyes dancing with mischief. But I did it anyway, and I still do. My mind drifted, as it so often did, to my son, Daniel. He's 38 now, the CEO of Mitchell Financial Group, a firm I built from nothing over 3 decades. When I stepped down 5 years ago, I handed him the keys. By all accounts, he was thriving. The company was turning massive profits. Clients were thrilled, and Daniel had the corner office, tailored suits, a luxury car, and a penthouse in Manhattan. On paper, he was everything a father could hope for. Successful, independent, living the American dream. Except we barely talked anymore. It hadn't always been that way. When he was a kid, Daniel and I were inseparable. Weekend fishing trips, playing catch in the backyard, late-night talks about his dreams and fears. I taught him how to drive. I helped him apply to colleges. I sat with him through his first real heartbreak. He was my pride and joy. But somewhere down the line, things shifted. Maybe it started when he left for college, or when he landed his first real executive job and got a taste of real influence. Or maybe, after Catherine died, he buried himself in his work to distance himself from my grief. Now, our relationship was reduced to occasional texts and brief formal phone calls on birthdays and holidays. "How are you doing, Dad?" "Doing fine, son. How about you?" "Busy. Work is crazy." "I understand." Click. I tried not to take it personally. Daniel had his own life, his own heavy responsibilities. He was building an empire, while I was just an old man fishing off a dock, living in the past. But I missed him. I missed the boy he used to be. I missed feeling like I mattered to him. The wind picked up, rustling the autumn leaves behind me and kicking up small whitecaps on the river. I pulled my jacket tighter and glanced at my watch. 9:15 p.m. I figured I'd stay another 20 minutes, then head inside, warm up some leftover soup, and pretend to care about whatever was playing on TV. That's when I heard it. An engine, high revving, loud, coming from the access road behind the trees about 100 yards away. During the day, that wouldn't mean much. The road connected to the main highway a mile out. But at this hour, on a cold Wednesday night in October, That stretch of dirt and gravel was practically deserted. It was a narrow lane flanked by dense woods on one side and the river on the other. Nobody drove down it at night. And this engine was roaring. It was being pushed to its absolute limit. The screaming motor was accompanied by the harsh, violent crunch of tires tearing over gravel. I turned around, squinting into the pitch darkness beyond the tree line, my fishing rod forgotten in my hand. Something was wrong. That sound carried panic, a blind recklessness, as if someone was driving at breakneck speed with zero regard for life. Nobody drove like that unless they were running from something or charging toward something terrible. A cold knot of dread tightened in my gut as the noise grew louder, closer, more desperate. I stood frozen on the wooden dock, my heart hammering against my ribs, every instinct screaming that whatever was about to happen would change everything. I looked up toward the road, an ominous chill sweeping over me like the freezing October wind off the water. The roar of the engine grew deafening. My blood went cold. A black sedan came barreling down the dirt road with its headlights completely off, moving like a predator in the dark. No brake lights, no hesitation, just pure speed and the terrifying scream of an engine pushed past its red line. Gravel violently sprayed into the air, glittering under the faint moonlight as the tires shredded the uneven ground. I dropped my fishing rod. It clattered against the wooden dock, but I barely registered the sound. My eyes were locked on the vehicle as it hurtled straight toward the riverbank. It was a black Mercedes S-Class. Even in the shadows, I recognized the sleek contours, the polished frame, the chrome trim catching the distant light. Then I saw the license plate, 7XPJ-492. The breath caught in my throat. That was Daniel's car. "No," I whispered, the word instantly swallowed by the wind. The Mercedes shattered the low wooden guardrail, sending splinters flying through the night sky. For one surreal, suspended second, the car hung in midair, its front doors already flung wide open. Then gravity took over. Nose first, it slammed into the Hudson River with a deafening crash. A massive wall of water erupted into the night, glittering silver under the moonlight, before collapsing back into the dark currents. The engine was still running, producing a muffled underwater gurgle, a dying mechanical scream against the weight of the river. And the doors, both front doors, were wide open, flapping like broken wings in the current. But there was no one inside. "What?" My voice came out as a raspy gasp. An accident? Where was he? My mind raced violently, trying to make sense of what I was witnessing. The car had been moving fast, intentionally, as if aimed at the water. But if it was an accident, why were the doors open beforehand? Why were the headlights turned off? Where on earth was Daniel? There was no time to think. I moved. My legs carried me down the dock toward the small aluminum fishing boat tied to the end. My hands shook violently as I untied the lines, my breath coming in short, panicked gasps. Behind me, the Mercedes was sinking fast, the engine hissing furiously as river water flooded the cabin. I finally unhooked the knot, threw myself into the boat, and nearly capsized it. I grabbed the oars, shoved them into the locks, and pulled against the current with everything I had. My heart was pounding so hard it echoed in my ears like a drum. The car was sinking about 100 yards out, its red taillights still glowing beneath the surface, casting an eerie red haze through the dark water. Massive air bubbles violently churned to the surface. The open doors swung gently, almost peacefully, as the vehicle tilted further and began its slow descent into the deep. I pulled harder on the oars, my arms burning, my lungs screaming for air. The freezing wind whipped across the river, stinging my face. But I didn't care. All I could think about was that car, Daniel's car, disappearing beneath the waves. Then I saw him. A figure was standing on the bank, roughly 50 feet from where the guardrail had been smashed to pieces. Tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a dark jacket. He wasn't moving. He was just standing there, watching the car go under. Just watching. My oars stopped mid-stroke. The boat drifted forward on momentum. For a long, unbearable second, I forgot how to breathe. It was Daniel. Even from that distance, I knew his silhouette. The way he stood, shoulders slightly hitched, hands shoved deep into his pockets. The moonlight caught the side of his face, revealing an expression that was pale, wide-eyed, and frozen. He looked utterly terrified and profoundly guilty. "Daniel!" I screamed, my voice cracking. "Daniel!" His head snapped toward me. Our eyes met across the pitch-black water, father and son. In that agonizing moment, the world stopped spinning. I saw the sheer shock on his face. His mouth opened slightly, as if he wanted to say something, to explain, to offer an excuse. But he didn't. Instead, he turned and ran. "Daniel, wait!" I screamed, standing up in the unstable boat. It rocked violently under me, nearly throwing me into the freezing water, but I didn't care. "Daniel, stop!" He didn't stop. He sprinted toward the dirt road, his boots crunching loudly over the gravel. Then I saw it, a dark sedan idling behind the tree line, its headlights off. He threw himself into the driver's seat, slammed the door, and the engine roared to life. Tires shrieked as he tore away, kicking up a cloud of dust and stone. The sedan's taillights flickered for a fraction of a second before he hit the bend, disappearing completely into the night. Just like that, he was gone. I stood there in the boat, oars hanging loosely from my hands, staring at the empty road. Behind me, the Mercedes gave up its final fight. The engine hissed one last time, choked, and went silent, slipping beneath the water with a soft, bubbling sigh. The taillights blinked once, twice, and went completely dark. The river returned to a deadly silence. I collapsed onto the wooden bench, my legs shaking uncontrollably. My phone was in my jacket pocket. With trembling hands, I pulled it out and stared at the screen for a long moment, my thumb hovering over the pad. Then I dialed. 911, what's your emergency? The dispatcher's voice was calm, professional, and entirely detached. I opened my mouth, but no sound came out. My throat closed up. My chest felt completely hollow. "Sir, are you there? What is your emergency?" I swallowed hard, my voice barely above a whisper. "I need to report—" I caught my breath, gasping. "A car was just pushed into the river." "Sir, can you confirm your location?" "Half a mile south of the riverfront docks. Private dock on the Hudson." "Is anyone injured? Is anyone in the water?" I closed my eyes. The image of Daniel standing on that bank, watching, waiting, burned against my eyelids. "No," I said quietly. "There's no one in the water." "Can you describe what happened, sir?" I felt the immense weight of the truth pressing down on my chest, threatening to crush me. But I forced the words out anyway. "I know who did it." The line went quiet for a beat. "Sir? I'm reporting a crime," I said, my voice trembling with an agonizing mix of heartbreak and resolve. "A car was pushed into the river, and I know who did it. It was my son." The police and emergency response crews arrived 30 minutes later. I was still standing there, soaked through, shivering uncontrollably from the cold and the sheer shock of it all. Flashing red and blue lights painted the bank in violent hues, turning the dark river into a chaotic kaleidoscope of crimson and deep sapphire. Voices echoed across the water, sharp, quick, professional. A heavy tow truck rumbled to a stop near the shattered guardrail, and a rescue boat was launched into the Hudson, its engine humming loudly. I barely registered any of it. I just stood on the bank, water dripping from my clothes, wrapping my arms tightly around myself as if trying to hold my broken body together. My teeth chattered violently. My legs felt like they were going to give out at any second. The cold had settled deep into my bones, and I wasn't sure I'd ever feel warm again. A woman approached me, her shoes crunching on the loose gravel. She was in her early 40s, Asian, with sharp, intelligent eyes, and short black hair pulled back into a practical ponytail. She wore a dark blazer over a white shirt, a detective's badge clipped to her belt. Her face was calm and controlled, but I could see the sharp focus behind her eyes. She was already piecing the scene together, reading the ground like a book. "Mr. Mitchell," she said, her voice steady without being harsh. "I'm Detective Sarah Mitchell. You're the one who called this in." I nodded, my throat too tight to form words. "Can you tell me what happened out here?" I opened my mouth, but the explanation caught in my throat. How could I explain what I had just seen? How could I put into words the image of my own son standing on that bank, watching his luxury car sink into the river, and then fleeing like a criminal in the dark? My voice sounded like dry sandpaper. I saw the car go in. The Mercedes. I gestured helplessly toward the water. Detective Mitchell's eyes followed my hand, then returned to my face. She studied me for a long moment, giving me the uneasy feeling that she could see right through my exhaustion. "We're going to get it out," she said. "The dive team is already down there. Just sit tight." I wanted to sit down. I wanted to collapse onto the cold earth, close my eyes, and pretend this nightmare wasn't real. But I couldn't move. I felt rooted to the spot, staring at the patch of dark water where Daniel's car had vanished. It took another hour. The dive team worked under heavy floodlights, their harsh beams turning the black night into an artificial day. I watched as they secured thick steel cables to the sunken Mercedes with precise, efficient movements. A heavy winch truck roared to life, its gears grinding loudly as it began to pull. Slowly, agonizingly, the car emerged from the depths. Water cascaded from the open doors and shattered windows, pouring back into the river like heavy waterfalls. The black paint glistened under the floodlights, smooth yet mangled. The front end was crushed from the impact. The hood was buckled upwards. The chrome grille was twisted into a grotesque, jagged smile. Yet it was undeniably Daniel's car. I would know it anywhere. The tow truck hauled it onto the bank with a harsh metallic screech. The investigation team immediately closed in, inspecting the cabin, the underside, and every inch of the wreckage. I stood a few feet away, hands shoved deep into my pockets, my breathing shallow. Then someone called out, "Detective, we got something in the back." An officer was kneeling by the pop trunk, shining a heavy flashlight inside. Detective Mitchell walked over quickly, and I followed, my legs moving on complete autopilot. There, resting on the soaked carpeting amidst scattered debris, was a heavy black safe. It was about the size of a briefcase, made of solid reinforced steel, with a digital keypad lock on the front face. Water dripped from its edges, forming a small puddle on the metal floor of the trunk. An officer tried the handle, but it didn't budge. "Lock tight," he noted. Detective Mitchell looked over at me. Her expression was unreadable, but her eyes carried a heavy question. "Mr. Mitchell," she asked slowly, "do you know who this car belongs to?" The question hung in the cold night air, heavy enough to suffocate. I felt every eye on that bank turned toward me. The police, the rescue crew, the firefighters, all waiting. I could have lied. I could have played dumb. I could have protected Daniel, bought him time to run, time to disappear, time to escape whatever consequences were waiting for him. But what kind of father would that make me? I thought of Catherine. I thought of the life we had built together, the values we had tried to instilling in our son. Honesty, integrity, doing the right thing even when it hurts, especially when it hurts. I swallowed the lump in my throat, my voice barely audible over the hum of the generators. "It's my son's car." The words felt like lead on my tongue. Detective Mitchell's eyes narrowed slightly. "Your son, Daniel Mitchell, the CEO?" "I couldn't stop him," I gasped, my chest aching. "I saw him tonight. He stood right over there and watched it sink. Then he drove off." A quiet murmur broke out among the officers. Detective Mitchell raised a hand to silence them, stepping closer to me. "Mr. Mitchell, are you telling me your son intentionally dumped this vehicle in the river?" I couldn't look her in the eye. I stared down at the mud and crushed gravel beneath my boots, and I nodded. "Jesus," someone muttered. Detective Mitchell turned back to the safe, her jaw set. "Get a locksmith down here. Now." The locksmith took 40 minutes to arrive. He was a lean man in his 50s with calloused hands and a heavy toolkit slung over his shoulder. Kneeling by the safe, he studied the lock with a level of intense focus you'd expect from a surgeon. The officers formed a loose circle, watching him in tense silence. I stood on the outer edge, arms crossed, my heart hammering so violently I thought it might burst through my ribs. I had no idea what was inside that safe. I didn't know what Daniel was hiding, what he was so desperate to destroy that he'd drown his own car in the Hudson River, but I knew I had to find out. The work felt like it took an eternity. Metal scraped against metal. Small picks clicked rhythmically. Then, with a soft, distinct mechanical click, the heavy lock yielded. The locksmith stepped back, nodding at Detective Mitchell. She pulled on a pair of rubber gloves and knelt down. Her fingers caught the edge of the heavy steel lid, and she slowly lifted it open. The beam of a flashlight cut inside, illuminating the contents. From where I stood, I couldn't see clearly, but I saw Detective Mitchell's face. The color completely drained from her cheeks. Her eyes widened, and her lips compressed into a hard, rigid line. She looked up at me, and for the first time since she'd arrived, I saw something in her eyes that made my blood run ice cold. It was horror. "Mr. Mitchell," she said, her voice tight and measured, "you need to sit down right now." I stepped forward and looked inside the safe, and a wave of severe nausea hit me so hard my head spun. For a moment, the world around me, the flashing lights, the murmuring officers, the bitter wind, faded into static noise. The only thing left was the contents of that small black safe illuminated under the flashlight. 3 black USB flash drives were lined up in a neat row. Each one had a strip of white tape stuck to it with handwritten dates: October 2021, March 2022, July 2023. Next to them lay a leather-bound notebook, waterlogged and swollen but fully intact. Through the translucent pages, I could see dense, precise rows of numbers, dates, and names written in a compact code. And then there was the cash, stacks of $100 bills bound tightly in thick rubber bands, totaling at least $50,000. They were soaked, sticking together, but unmistakable. But it was the documents resting beneath the money that turned my stomach upside down. A thick stack of contracts, maybe 12 pages deep, printed on heavy legal bond paper. The edges were damp and curling, but the text remained sharp, and at the bottom of every single page, signed in heavy black ink, was a signature. Robert Mitchell, my name, my signature. Except I had never seen those papers in my life. I stared at the documents, my hands shaking uncontrollably. Ignoring Detective Mitchell's warning glance, I leaned closer, tracing the ink with my eyes. The distinct loop of the R, the sharp slant of the M, the elegant flourish at the end of Mitchell. It was all there. It looked exactly like my signature. It was almost perfect, but it wasn't mine. "That's not me," I whispered, my voice trembling. Detective Mitchell's head snapped toward me. "Excuse me." I pointed a shaking finger at the contracts. "That isn't my signature. It looks like it, but it isn't. I never signed these documents." She studied me for a long, grueling moment, her face unreadable. Then she carefully lifted one of the contracts from the safe and held it up to the light, her eyes flicking back and forth between the page and my face. "Mr. Mitchell," she said calmly, "this matches your legal signature down to the stroke. I know how it looks, but it's fake." I swallowed hard, my throat raw. "I've signed thousands of documents over 35 years. Leases, corporate contracts, board resolutions. I know my own hand. That—" I gestured at the paper. "That's a copy. A good one, but a copy." Detective Mitchell set her jaw. I could see the skepticism in her eyes. She thought I was lying. She thought I was trying to cover my tracks, trying to shield myself from whatever massive crime was printed on those pages. But I was telling the truth. "Look closely," I pleaded, despair bleeding into my tone. "The pressure on the pen is all wrong. The angle on the M is too steep, and the tail on the L, I always loop it back. Always. Whoever signed this missed that." She didn't answer right away. She just stared at the page, her brow furrowed deep in thought. Then she reached back into the safe and pulled out one final item. It was a sealed white envelope, unmarked except for a single line of text, written on the front in thick black marker. "Catherine, the proof." My breath caught in my chest. Catherine, my late wife's name. My hands went completely numb. The ground beneath my feet felt like it was tilting, and I had to grab the side of the tow truck just to keep from falling over. "What is that?" My voice cracked into pieces. "What is that envelope?" Detective Mitchell didn't answer immediately. She turned the envelope over in her gloved hands, examining the seal, before looking back up at me. Her expression had changed again. The suspicion was gone, replaced by extreme caution. "We need to bring all of this into the station," she said quietly. "And you need to come with us, Mr. Mitchell. I need a formal statement on the record." I barely heard her. My eyes were glued to that envelope. locked onto Daniel's distinct handwriting, spelling out his mother's name. I would know his script anywhere. The sharp angles, the rushed slant, the heavy pressure on the paper. What had Daniel put inside that envelope? What did he mean by proof? And why, God, why was Catherine's name on it? The drive to the precinct took 20 minutes, but it felt like an eternity. I sat in the back of Detective Mitchell's squad car, staring out the window at the dark streets sweeping past. My clothes were damp and cold against my skin, and I couldn't stop shivering. The safe and all its contents had been logged into evidence bags and placed in a separate vehicle. On the way over, Detective Mitchell made a series of brief, urgent phone calls, dropping heavy terms like financial fraud, forged legal instruments, and federal jurisdiction. By the time we walked through the doors, the FBI was already waiting. Agent Marcus Cole met us in the lobby. He was a tall, broad-shouldered man in his mid-40s, with short, cropped graying hair and sharp, calculating eyes that missed nothing. He wore a dark tailored suit and a deep burgundy tie, moving with the cold precision of a veteran investigator. When he shook my hand, his grip was firm and measured. "Mr. Mitchell," he said, his voice low and steady, "I'm Special Agent Marcus Cole with the FBI's Financial Crimes Division. I know tonight has been an absolute nightmare for you." I nodded slowly, not trusting my voice to work. He pointed down a long, sterile hallway. "Let's talk." They led me into an interrogation room, small, windowless, furnished with nothing more than a stainless steel table and 2 chairs bolted to the floor. A camera in the corner flickered silently. Detective Mitchell sat across from me with a notepad open, while Agent Cole stood near the door, arms crossed, watching me with those piercing eyes. They bombarded me with questions. When was the last time I saw Daniel? What was the state of our personal relationship? How involved was I in the day-to-day operations of Mitchell Financial? Had I ever signed financial documents without reviewing them first? Did the name Eddie Torres mean anything to me? I answered as best as I could through the haze, but my mind kept drifting back to that white envelope. Catherine, the proof. Finally, Agent Cole stepped forward and leaned both hands on the table, looming over me. He had let Detective Mitchell run most of the questioning, but now his gaze locked onto mine, sending a cold shiver down my spine. "Mr. Mitchell," he said quietly, "we are currently processing the contents of those flash drives. We're reviewing the contracts, the ledger, and everything else in that safe. But I need to be completely straight with you." He paused, and for a second I saw a flicker of genuine pity in his eyes. "What we are uncovering is going to be extremely painful," he continued. "It is going to shatter everything you thought you knew about your son, your company, and your family." My chest tightened until I couldn't breathe. He leaned back, his face grim. "Are you absolutely sure you want to hear this?" 2 days later, the FBI called me back in. I hadn't slept a wink since that horrific night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Daniel standing on that muddy riverbank, watching his car sink into the Hudson. I saw the look in his eyes, pale, terrified, guilty, before he turned and ran into the shadows. I heard the violent splash of the Mercedes hitting the water and the muffled, agonizing churn of the engine against the tide. And I saw that envelope, mocking me with my late wife's name written in my son's heavy handwriting. Those 2 days passed in a blur. I didn't eat. I barely left the house. The phone rang constantly. Reporters, former business partners, people I hadn't spoken to in years. I ignored every single call. I just sat in my living room, staring at the blank walls, waiting for the truth that felt like it was going to destroy me. On Friday afternoon, at exactly 2 o'clock, I walked into the FBI's Manhattan field office. Agent Marcus Cole was waiting for me in a conference room on the 7th floor. The room was cold and sterile, lit by humming fluorescent tubes, with a long table covered in manila folders, printouts, and clear evidence bags. Detective Mitchell was there too, standing by the window with her arms crossed, her expression guarded. Agent Cole gestured to a chair. "Mr. Mitchell, thank you for coming in." I sat down, lacing my fingers tightly in my lap to hide the trembling. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. "We've thoroughly analyzed the contents of the safe," Agent Cole began, his voice calm and unreadable. He opened a thick folder and slid it across the table toward me. The scale of what we found is staggering. I stared at the folder. I didn't want to open it. I didn't want to look inside, but I knew I had no choice. Agent Cole didn't wait for me. He began laying out documents one by one, like a dealer setting down cards. The 3 flash drives, he said, contain complete financial records spanning the last 4 years. Bank statements, wire transfer logs, offshore account ledgers. We've cross-referenced everything with your firm's official filings. He stopped and looked me dead in the eye. Mr. Mitchell, someone has been systematically embezzling from Mitchell Financial Group's client trust accounts. Over the past 4 years, $47 million has been siphoned off and funneled through a complex web of shell companies and offshore entities. The number hit me like a physical blow. I felt the air leave my lungs. 47 million? I rasped. Yes, and it doesn't stop there. Agent Cole pulled out another sheet, a printout of wire logs. We also found proof of extensive bribery. Over $2.3 million paid out to various state and local officials over the last 3 years. Regulators, tax auditors, compliance officers, all paid off to look the other way and keep the firm's official books looking spotless. My hands shook violently. I pressed my palms flat against the cold table to steady myself. There's more, Cole continued relentlessly. Tax fraud. $8 million in unreported revenue routed through fake consulting contracts. The IRS is going to build a massive case on this alone. I couldn't speak. My mind was reeling. The numbers were too big, too catastrophic to comprehend. 47 million, 2.3 million, 8 million. How was any of this possible under my roof? Here's the problem, Mr. Mitchell. Agent Cole leaned in, his gaze sharp as a razor. Every single transaction, every wire transfer, every contract, every payoff was authorized with your signature. He slid a stack of contracts toward me. I recognized them instantly, the same documents from the safe, bearing my name at the bottom of every page. Our forensic document examiners analyzed these signatures, Cole said. They compared them against verified samples of your genuine signature from tax returns and legal filings. The forged signatures are a 94% match to your real hand. 94%. I stared at the ink, my vision blurring. The signatures were terrifyingly convincing. If I didn't know better, I would have sworn I signed them myself. Whoever did this, Cole whispered, was meticulous. They studied your writing for years. They replicated the pressure, the slant, the loops. They engineered it to make you look like the mastermind. But it wasn't me, I choked out, my voice breaking. We know, Cole said, his tone softening slightly. Our experts flagged microscopic inconsistencies, tiny details only a trained eye would spot. The angle of certain letters, the micro-spacing, the lift at the end of the strokes. It's a brilliant fake, but it is a fake. A surge of relief washed over me, but it was instantly incinerated by a wave of pure, scorching rage. Daniel, I spat, the name feeling like poison in my mouth. He did this. He forged my signature. He stole from the firm, bribed officials, committed massive fraud, and he set it all up to pin the blame on me. Agent Cole nodded slowly. That is our primary working theory, yes. Why? I cried out, my voice fracturing. Why would he do this to me? Money, power, complete corporate control. Agent Cole pointed to a corporate flowchart on the table. According to state filings, you still hold 65% of Mitchell Financial's voting shares. Daniel holds 20. The rest is split among minority investors. If you were indicted and convicted of these federal crimes, you would forfeit everything, your shares, your position, your freedom. Daniel would assume total control of the company. A sickening knot tied itself in my stomach. The evidence was absolute. My own son, the boy I raised, the man I trusted with my legacy, had systematically plotted my ruin. He wanted to throw me to the wolves to take what was mine. I'm going to fight this, I said, my voice hardening into iron. I won't let him destroy everything. Agent Cole searched my face, then gave a single firm nod. You need to retain elite legal counsel immediately. Someone top tier in white-collar defense. I thought of Jonathan Pierce, a ruthless defense attorney I'd worked with years ago. He was relentless, sharp, and built for high-stakes warfare. I would call him the second I stepped out of this room. Detective Mitchell, who had been quiet by the window, finally spoke up. Her voice was uncharacteristically gentle. "Mr. Mitchell, there's one more thing." I turned to look at her. She exchanged a grim glance with Agent Cole. He reached into an evidence bag on the table and pulled out the thick white envelope, the one labeled Catherine. The proof. My chest felt like it was being crushed in a vice. Agent Cole held the envelope in his hands, his face heavy with dread. He didn't open it right away. He just looked at me with an expression that carried an agonizing blend of sorrow and pity. "Mr. Mitchell," he said softly, his voice trembling slightly, "are you absolutely sure you want to see what's inside this?" "It was about your wife's passing," he said softly. 3 years ago." The words hung in the air, cold and suffocating. "Catherine. My Catherine." Agent Cole held up the heavy envelope labeled Catherine, the proof, and looked at me gently. "Are you absolutely sure you want to see this? It directly involves what happened to your wife." With trembling hands, I took the envelope and slid out the contents. What was inside went far beyond anything I could have imagined. A mini digital voice recorder, a heavy manila folder bearing the letterhead of a private investigation firm, and a stack of glossy photographs showing the undercarriage of a car. Catherine's car. The exact Honda Accord she was driving the night she died. Agent Cole reached over and picked up the recorder. "Mr. Mitchell, I need you to listen to this." He pressed play. For the first few seconds there was only the hollow hiss of static. Then her voice cut through the room. "Catherine." "Daniel, I know what you've been doing," she said. Her voice was tight and restrained, but I could hear the anger and the underlying fear lacing her words. "Mom, I don't know what you're talking about," Daniel replied smoothly. "Don't lie to me. I hired someone, a forensic accountant. He traced everything. $5 million, Daniel. You stole $5 million from your father's firm." A long silence stretched over the tape. When Daniel spoke again, his tone was noticeably colder. "You hired someone to investigate me?" "I had to. Your father trusts you. He handed you the entire operation, and you—" Her voice cracked, overwhelmed with emotion. "How could you do this to him? To us?" "I didn't steal anything. I borrowed it. I'm putting it back." "Borrowed it? Daniel, you funneled it through shell companies and altered the ledgers. That isn't borrowing. That's embezzlement." Another heavy silence. When Daniel replied, his voice had gone completely flat and emotionless. "What are you going to do?" "I'm going to the police first thing in the morning, and then I'm telling your father everything." "Mom." His tone shifted, softening into a desperate plea, but beneath it lurked something dark. "You shouldn't do that." "I have to. You committed a crime, Daniel. I cannot protect you from the consequences of this." "Mom, this conversation is over." The recording cut out with a soft click. I stared at the plastic recorder, my hands shaking violently. That conversation took place a week before Catherine's crash, 1 week before she was taken from me. Agent Cole opened the manila folder and slid the report across the table. It was from a private investigator named Gerald Moss, a former NYPD detective, dated 2 days before Catherine died. She had hired him to audit Daniel's financial activity. The documentation was meticulous. Bank statements, wire transfers, offshore accounts, and shell companies registered in the Cayman Islands and Delaware. $5 million, exactly as she had said. At the bottom of the final page, in Catherine's neat handwriting, was a note. "I have to tell Robert. I have to make this right." My vision blurred. Agent Cole then pushed the glossy photographs toward me. Our automotive forensics unit analyzed these. They were close-up shots of the brake assembly from Catherine's car. Red circles highlighted the brake lines. They hadn't snapped from wear or rust. They had been sliced. Clean, deliberate cuts halfway through the lines. Enough to hold pressure for a short drive, but guaranteed to fail completely the moment hard pressure was applied to the pedal. The room felt like it was spinning. It had been a rainy night in late summer, the kind of sudden downpour that turns the pavement into a slick mirror. Catherine was driving home from her book club. I remembered telling her to be careful. She had laughed, kissed my cheek, and said, "I've been driving in the rain for 40 years, Robert. I think I can handle it." Those were the last words she ever said to me. The police called at 11:47 p.m. Catherine's car had veered off Route 9 near the old mill, slamming into a utility pole at high speed. The airbags deployed, but the impact was too severe. She was gone before the paramedics even arrived. The original investigation ruled it a tragic accident. Slick roads, poor visibility, excessive speed. I believed them. It made sense. I buried my wife, mourned her, and spent 3 painful years blaming the rain, the roads, and cruel fate. But it wasn't fate, it was Daniel. I looked up at Agent Cole, my voice reduced to a raspy whisper. "He took her from me. He cut the brake lines. He staged the crash. He—" My throat seized, choking off the words. "This evidence alone isn't enough for a murder conviction just yet," Cole said quietly. "However, we are officially reopening the investigation into your wife's death. We're bringing in specialized accident reconstruction experts, reviewing the original crash reports, and re-interviewing every witness. If Daniel was responsible, we will prove it." Something inside me finally broke. All the grief, solitude, guilt, and unanswered questions I had kept bottled up for 3 years burst open. I buried my face in my hands and wept uncontrollably. For Catherine, for the life we lost, and for the monster my son had become. Detective Mitchell placed a gentle hand on my shoulder, staying silent and offering a quiet, grounding presence. I didn't know how long I sat there crying. Minutes, maybe hours. Time lost all meaning. Eventually, the tears ran dry. I wiped my face with the back of my hand, but I didn't stand up, not yet. I sat staring at those photos of the cut brake lines, the voice recorder, and the investigator's report Catherine had commissioned days before her life was stolen. Then the ultimate question surfaced. Why? Why would Daniel do this? Why kill his own mother? Was it really just over $5 million? In my 35 years in finance, I had seen greed drive people to terrible things, but sabotaging his own mother's car, knowing she would crash, knowing she would die, I couldn't wrap my head around it. $5 million was enough to ruin a career and send him to prison, but was it enough to murder his mother? No. There had to be more. Then I recalled the forged signatures Agent Cole had shown me earlier. $47 million embezzled over 4 years. A master scheme engineered to frame me. Daniel hadn't just stolen $5 million, he had stolen $47 million, and he had set it all up so I would take the fall. If I went to prison, he would gain control of my 65% voting stake in the firm. That's what Cole had said. If I was convicted, I would lose everything, and Daniel would inherit it all. Was that it? Did he kill Catherine not just to keep her quiet about the $5 million, but because she was the first obstacle in his grand plan to frame me and seize everything I had spent my life building? Catherine's death wasn't the end of his plot. It was the beginning, and I was the next target. I slowly stood up, my legs trembling but holding firm. Agent Cole and Detective Mitchell both looked up at me. I met Cole's gaze, my voice steady and cold. "Help me find Daniel. I want to look him in the eye." By Monday morning, my phone was ringing incessantly. Daniel had made the front page of every major news outlet. I was pulled from a fitful sleep by the relentless buzzing on my nightstand. Shaking, I reached for my phone and stared at the screen. 12 missed calls, 27 text messages, and 17 voicemails. Then I saw the breaking news banner at the top of the screen. Mitchell Financial. CEO, Daniel. Mitchell surrenders to authorities, accuses. Father of masterminding multi-million-dollar embezzlement scheme. My chest slammed shut. I sat up in bed, my heart racing wildly, and unlocked the phone. The notification opened to a news article, and the opening line felt like a heavy blow straight to my gut. In a shocking turn of events, 38-year-old Daniel Mitchell, CEO of Mitchell Financial Group, surrendered to authorities this morning, announcing a press conference for 2 p.m. Sources report Mitchell plans to expose his father, company founder Robert Mitchell, 68, as the true mastermind behind a multi-million-dollar fraud ring. I couldn't catch my breath as I scrolled down through dozens of similar headlines. Every major outlet was running the story, and social media was erupting with speculation. The comment sections were filled with outrage and condemnation, and every finger was pointed straight at me. By noon, I was sitting in my living room, staring blindly at the television. Every channel was covering the fallout. My phone rang so relentlessly that I finally turned it off completely. News crews had already set up camp outside my house. Satellite vans parked along the curb, cameras mounted on tripods, and reporters shouting questions through the glass that I couldn't hear. At exactly 2 p.m., the press conference went live from outside the Manhattan precinct, where Daniel had turned himself in. Daniel stepped up to a bank of microphones, flanked by an attorney in an expensive suit, defense lawyer Richard Lawson. Daniel looked composed and entirely in control. Dressed in a dark navy suit, with a somber expression and hands folded neatly in front of him, he played the part of a man carrying a tragic, unbearable burden. He looked like a victim. Richard Lawson spoke first. "Good afternoon. My client, Daniel Mitchell, has voluntarily come forward to cooperate fully with law enforcement and deliver a statement today. Mr. Mitchell struggled with this decision for a long time, but he believes it is his moral duty to bring the truth to light, no matter how painful it may be." Lawson stepped back, letting Daniel take center stage. "Thank you for being here," Daniel began, his voice smooth with a carefully crafted tremor of emotion. "This is the hardest thing I have ever had to do, but I can no longer remain silent." He paused, looking down as if gathering courage before facing the cameras again with an expression of profound sorrow. "For the past several years, my father, Robert Mitchell, has been systematically embezzling funds from Mitchell Financial Group. Tens of millions of dollars were stolen from client trust accounts, routed through offshore entities, and hidden behind forged documentation. I uncovered this scheme 2 years ago, and I have struggled every single day with what to do." My stomach turned to ice. I felt the walls of the room closing in on me. "I wanted to protect my family," Daniel continued, his voice breaking right on cue. "My father built that firm. He built our family name. I didn't want to believe he was capable of this, so I gathered evidence and kept it locked in a safe, praying I was wrong, praying there was a logical explanation." He shook his head grimly. "There wasn't. When my father realized I knew what he had done, he attempted to frame me. He forged documents to make it look like I was taking the money, and he even abandoned his vehicle in the Hudson River to destroy evidence. When that failed, he tried to turn law enforcement against me." He looked directly into the camera lens with eyes full of hollow heartbreak. "I love my father, but I can no longer protect him, not while innocent people lose their life savings. I have to do the right thing, even if it costs me everything." Reporters erupted into a frenzy of shouted questions, but Daniel simply stepped back, letting his lawyer step in to handle the media circus. I sat frozen, staring at the screen. He had flipped the entire narrative. Daniel had painted himself as the brave whistleblower, risking it all to expose his corrupt father, and the entire world was buying it. Within an hour, Mitchell Financial Group's stock plummeted by 40%, triggering 2 trading halts due to extreme volatility. Furious clients flooded the lines demanding answers and threatening lawsuits, while employees panicked and the board called an emergency session. At 5 p.m., an email from the chairman of the board hit my inbox. "Mr. Mitchell, in light of recent developments, the board has voted unanimously to suspend your authority as chairman and major shareholder, pending a full internal investigation. You are barred from entering company premises or accessing firm accounts until further notice. Legal counsel will be in touch." I stared at the screen, hands trembling. 35 years of hard work, my reputation, my firm, and my legacy, all dismantled in a single afternoon by my own son. My phone, which I had turned back on to check my email, buzzed with an incoming call. I almost ignored it, unable to handle another reporter or aggressive attorney, but then I saw the caller ID, Thomas Parker. Thomas had been my trusted right-hand man for over a decade before I stepped back and asked him to transition into a mentorship role for Daniel. He knew the inner workings of the company better than anyone, If anyone knew what Daniel was truly up to, it was Thomas. I picked up. Thomas? Robert? His voice was low and tense. I've been trying to reach you all day. I saw the press conference. Thomas, my voice cracked. I didn't do any of this. I know, he interrupted quickly. I know you didn't do it, Robert, and I can prove it. I froze. What? I need to see you tonight, in person. I have evidence on Daniel, real evidence. But we can't discuss this over the phone. My heart pounded against my ribs. What kind of evidence? The kind that proves Daniel has been lying about everything. I closed my eyes, taking a long, slow breath. Amidst all the chaos and betrayal, a steady voice was offering a lifeline. I have evidence on Daniel. At 10 p.m., Thomas Parker arrived at my house. I didn't know who I could trust anymore. I stood behind the front door, watching him through the peephole for a long moment before finally turning the lock. The media vans had finally cleared out an hour earlier, leaving behind a cold, dark street, but the weight of their presence still hung over me. Every shadow felt like a threat. Every sound felt like an ambush. Thomas stood on my porch, hands shoved deep into his overcoat pockets, his breath pluming in the crisp October night air. He looked older than I remembered, deep lines etched around his eyes, his shoulders slightly hunched, as if carrying a heavy load. I opened the door. "Robert," he said quietly. I stepped aside, and he walked in. We sat down in the living room, the same room where I had watched Daniel's press conference hours earlier. The TV was off now, its black screen reflecting the silence. But the memory of Daniel's face playing the grieving, noble son was still burned into my mind. Thomas sat across from me, a worn leather briefcase resting on his lap. He didn't speak right away, he just looked at me with an unreadable expression. "I don't know who to trust anymore, Thomas," I said, my voice raspy with exhaustion. "The board suspended me. The media has convicted me. The FBI is questioning my innocence, and my own son—" I trailed off, unable to bring myself to finish the sentence. Thomas nodded slowly. "I saw the news conference." "Then you know what he's accusing me of." "I do." Thomas leaned forward, placing his hands flat on his briefcase. "And I know every word of it is a lie." I looked up at him, a fragile glimmer of hope fighting through the despair in my chest. "How do you know that?" "Because I've been watching him, Robert, for a long time." I frowned. "What do you mean?" Thomas let out a heavy sigh, as if releasing a burden he'd carried for years. 3 years ago, you asked me to step down as COO, so Daniel could take the lead. But you asked me to mentor him. I did. I worked alongside him, reported to him, and observed how he managed the accounts and interacted with clients. He paused, his jaw tightening, and I started noticing irregularities that didn't make sense. My pulse quickened. What kind of irregularities? Thomas unzipped his briefcase and pulled out a thick paper folder, setting it on the coffee table between us. "Transaction records," he said. "Files Daniel thought he had permanently erased from the company servers. I managed to recover them before they were wiped from the backups." I stared at the folder. What did they show? Wire transfers, millions of dollars moving through shell companies, offshore accounts, and dummy corporations, all tracing directly back to Daniel. Thomas flipped open the folder, revealing rows of highlighted bank statements. He was careful, but he wasn't invincible. I leaned in, scanning the documents. The numbers were staggering. Transfers of $200,000, $500,000, $1 million at a time, all flowing into entities I had never heard of. Thomas then pulled out another stack of papers. "And then there are these email printouts, dozens of them. At the top of each message, I saw Daniel's name paired with an address I didn't recognize. Eddie Torres." "Who is Eddie Torres?" I asked. Thomas's expression turned solemn. "A mechanic who runs an auto shop in Queens. Daniel put him on a private payroll 3 years ago." My blood ran cold. 3 years ago? That was right around when Catherine died? Thomas finished quietly. "Yes." The room felt like it was tilting again. "What are you saying?" Thomas pointed to an email dated 1 week before Catherine's crash. The subject line read, "Final payment confirmed." "I had a contact in the NYPD run a background check on Torres," Thomas explained. "He has a heavy criminal record. Fraud, forgery, evidence tampering. He's the kind of guy people hire when they need dirty work done off the books." I could hardly breathe. "Daniel paid him to cut my wife's brake lines?" "Yes," Thomas said firmly. I stared at the printout, my hands shaking so violently the text blurred. Thomas pulled out a final set of documents, high-resolution copies of credit card statements and receipts. And this is where all the embezzled money actually went. I looked down at the paper. Luxury hotels, 5-star resorts in Las Vegas, Macau, and Monaco. Massive casino markers. 50,000, 100,000, 200,000 at a time. Tens of thousands spent at designer boutiques, alongside discreet payments to high-end escort services and massive cash withdrawals across multiple cities. Daniel hadn't just embezzled money to build a business empire. He was a secret, compulsive gambler who had burned through tens of millions of dollars to fund a lifestyle of total excess, leaving a trail of destruction in his wake. "He didn't use the money to invest, Mr. Mitchell," Thomas said quietly. "He spent it, gambling, women, living the kind of life most people can only dream of, and every single dime of it came from the clients he stole from under your nose." A wave of nausea washed over me. How much was it, total? Over the last 4 years? Close to 10 million on personal vices alone. The rest was funneled into offshore accounts, probably kept as a safety net. $10 million. Wasted on casinos, luxury hotels, and high-end escorts. Families lost their life savings. Retirees watched their hard-earned pensions vanish into thin air, and Catherine paid the ultimate price just for discovering what he was doing. I looked up at Thomas, my voice barely a whisper. "Why didn't you come forward sooner?" Thomas's face tightened with genuine remorse. "I didn't have solid proof back then." Daniel was meticulous. He kept most of his tracks completely covered. I only managed to recover those erased files over the last couple of months, and even then, I wasn't sure what to do with them. "Daniel was your son." I couldn't bring myself to believe it either. He leaned back, letting out a long, slow breath. "But after today, watching him stand before the whole world and accuse you of the horrific crimes he committed, I knew I couldn't stay quiet a second longer. Something inside me hardened. For the first time in days, a faint spark of hope flickered in the darkness. "Will you testify?" I asked. "In court?" Thomas didn't hesitate for a beat. He stood up and looked me straight in the eye. "I'll take the stand against Daniel any time. But first, we need ironclad proof that those signatures were forged." Over the next few days, Thomas and I worked around the clock alongside the FBI to build a rock-solid case. My attorney, Jonathan Pierce, set up a command center in his Manhattan office. The walls were covered in complex timelines, financial flowcharts, and evidence photos. Agent Marcus Cole and Detective Sarah Mitchell joined us every single day, analyzing every document, every wire transfer, and every single lie Daniel had told. Our first major breakthrough came from Dr. Helen Cooper, a forensic document examiner brought in by Jonathan. She was a diminutive woman in her 60s with razor-sharp eyes and decades of expert experience. She spent 3 straight days analyzing the forged signatures on the embezzlement documents under high magnification. "Mr. Mitchell," she said, looking up from her microscope, "these signatures were digitally generated. Someone scanned your genuine signature, edited it in Photoshop, and printed it directly onto these contracts. Look right here. Under magnification, you can clearly see the pixelation. A real pen signature shows variations in downward pressure and natural ink flow. This has none of that." Agent Cole nodded grimly. "That testimony will hold up in court." The second breakthrough happened when the FBI tracked down Eddie Torres, the mechanic Daniel had put on his private payroll. Torres was 52 with a long record of fraud and operating illegal chop shops. When Agent Cole and 2 other agents showed up at his auto shop in Newark, Torres completely broke down within 20 minutes. The confession was caught on camera. Torres admitted that 3 years ago, in August of 2020, Daniel had paid him $15,000 in cash to cut the brake lines on a Honda Accord. Torres didn't ask questions, he just took the cash and did the job. A week later, when he saw the news report about Catherine Mitchell dying in a horrific crash on Route 9, he realized what he had been forced into. "I've lived with that guilt every day since," Torres said on the tape, his voice shaking violently. "I swear to God, I didn't know it was his mother." Agent Cole played the confession video for me in the command center. I sat there completely numb, staring at the screen, listening to Torres describe in terrifying detail how he had rigged my wife's car to fail. Jonathan placed a reassuring hand on my shoulder. "We've got him, Robert. This is more than enough to reopen Catherine's case as a homicide." But the most devastating piece of evidence came from the financial forensics team. They traced Daniel's offshore web and uncovered a shell corporation in the Cayman Islands holding $12 million, money systematically skimmed from client trust funds over 4 years. The account was opened under an alias, but the IP addresses used to manage it were traced straight back to Daniel's personal laptop. Detective Mitchell raised her eyes from her notes. "Mr. Mitchell, we also ran the ownership history on the sunken Mercedes S-Class. The vehicle was registered under Daniel's name, but you were listed as a co-owner and co-signer. You guaranteed the loan when he bought it back in 2020. Agent Cole gave a firm nod. "That actually works heavily in our favor. As a co-owner, we were able to access the vehicle's maintenance records, built-in GPS telemetry, and insurance files without waiting on a separate court order. The GPS logs confirmed the car was driven straight from Daniel's Manhattan penthouse to your dock that night, and Daniel's cell phone was tracked inside the vehicle the entire way." I closed my eyes. So it was all orchestrated. Daniel had driven his car to my dock and dumped it into the river to make sure I was the first witness, tying me directly to the crime scene to frame me. "Why dump the car near my house?" I asked softly. Agent Cole's face went cold. "He wanted you to be the one to find it. He wanted you to call 911. He needed you attached to that vehicle from the very beginning. That way, when the planted safe and forged documents were pulled out of the river, the police would instantly suspect you. It was all part of the frame-up, the location, the timing, the optics, all engineered to make you look guilty as sin." Silence settled over the room. Thomas spoke up. "So every single thing, from the embezzlement to setting up Robert, right down to sinking the car, was part of one long, calculated plan." "Precisely," Agent Cole said. "Daniel set his father up to take the fall so he could take total control of Mitchell Financial Group. With Robert in prison, Daniel would inherit his 65% controlling interest, making him the sole owner of a multi-million-dollar empire." A wave of bitter nausea hit me. Agent Cole leaned forward. "Mr. Mitchell, Daniel is sharp. He's already framed himself as the noble, whistle-blowing son in the eyes of the public. The media loves a tragic hero. If we go straight to trial, his high-powered lawyers will try to tear you apart on the witness stand. The absolute cleanest way to bring him down is to catch him making a full confession on tape." I raised my head. "How do we do that?" "We set a trap. You arrange a private meeting with him, somewhere he feels entirely safe and in control. We bug the entire location with hidden cameras and long-range mics. You get him talking, and you push him to admit what he did." "Where?" I asked. Agent Cole pulled out a map. "Somewhere with deep emotional history. Somewhere that will make him drop his guard." I stared at the map for a long moment. Then my mind drifted to the old wooden cabin up in the woods. The place where Daniel and I used to go every summer when he was just a little boy. The place where he used to tell me I was his hero. "I know the exact place," I said quietly. Agent Cole looked at me intently. "Are you absolutely sure you can pull this off?" I met his gaze without flinching. "I know what I have to do. We meet him at Lake Placid. That's the only place left where any piece of his conscience might still exist." Before heading up to Lake Placid, I found myself buried in memories of better days. I sat in my living room, staring at a framed photograph I'd taken down from the mantelpiece. The picture was faded now, the colors washed out by time, but every detail remained crystal clear. Catherine, Daniel, and I were standing together on the dock at Lake Placid. Daniel was 8 years old, holding up a small trout he had caught, his face lit up with the pure, unblemished joy only a child can feel. Catherine had her arm around him, wearing the warm, brilliant smile that had made me fall in love with her all those years ago. And I stood beside them, a hand resting proudly on Daniel's shoulder, looking at my family as if they were the only thing that mattered in the whole world. Because they were. That was the summer of 1993. We had spent 2 weeks at that rustic little cabin by the lake, far away from the noise and chaos of the city. No phones, no faxes, no business deals, just the three of us. I closed my eyes and the memories flooded back. Daniel had been so small then, his voice high and clear, his hands soft. Every morning, father and son would head out to fish, sitting on the wooden dock as the sun crested the water. I taught him how to bait a hook, how to cast his line, and how to wait patiently for a bite. "Dad," he had said one morning, looking up at me with wide eyes full of wonder, "you're my hero." I laughed, ruffling his hair. "I'm just your dad, kiddo." "No," he insisted, dead serious. "You're my hero. You know everything." I remembered the surge of pride that filled my chest back then. Looking at that little boy, my son, I swore to myself that I would do everything in my power to be worthy of those words. One night, we sat by the stone fireplace roasting marshmallows while a heavy rain poured outside, drumming against the roof. Catherine wrapped Daniel in a warm blanket and pulled him close. "Do you know what the most important thing in life is, Daniel?" she asked, her voice soft but firm. "What, Mom?" "Honor," she said. "Honor is worth more than money, more than success. Honor means doing the right thing, even when it's hard, even when no one is watching." Daniel nodded, his young face thoughtful. "I'll remember, Mom, I promise." Catherine kissed the top of his head. "I know you will, sweetheart." Later that night, after Daniel had fallen asleep, Catherine and I sat by the dying fire, her head resting on my shoulder. "He's a good boy, Robert," I whispered. "He is," Catherine agreed. "He's going to grow up to be a fine man. I can feel it." I believed her with every fiber of my being. But now, sitting alone in my living room 30 years later, I had to ask myself, when did it all change? When did that innocent, wide-eyed boy who called me his hero and promised to make us proud turn into a monster who killed his own mother and plotted to destroy his father? I opened my eyes and stared at the photograph. Daniel's smile looked so genuine, so pure. Where did that boy go? The drive up to Lake Placid took 5 grueling hours. I set out early Saturday morning before the sun had fully broken over the horizon. The city was still dead quiet, the streets empty, as I drove north along Interstate 87, watching skyscrapers and concrete slowly give way to dense forests and mountains. By noon, the skies opened up. Rain hit the windshield in heavy, unrelenting sheets, turning the highway into a slick, dangerous ribbon of black asphalt. The wipers slapped frantically against the glass, but I could barely see a few feet ahead. It was the exact same heavy rain that had fallen the night Catherine died. I gripped the steering wheel tight, my knuckles turning white, forcing my eyes to stay glued to the road. But the memories refused to let go. Catherine's laughter, Daniel's young voice, the quiet cabin by the water. When had it all fallen apart? At 6 p.m. I arrived at Lake Placid. The cabin looked identical to the memory I held. Small, weathered, surrounded by towering pines. The windows were dark, the porch empty. I parked the car and sat there for a long moment, staring at the place where we used to be a real family. Agent Cole and his tactical team had arrived an hour earlier. They had wired the entire cabin with state-of-the-art surveillance, hidden micro cameras planted in the living room, sensitive audio receivers embedded in the walls, all positioned to capture every word and movement. Cole had assured me the equipment was completely invisible. Daniel wouldn't suspect a thing. Agent Cole stepped out from an unmarked van parked 100 yards back in the trees. He walked over to my driver's window, his expression grave. "Are you ready for this, Mr. Mitchell?" he asked. I nodded, though my hands were shaking. "Remember," Cole said, "you only have one shot at this. We need an explicit confession on tape. We need him to admit what he did to your wife, what he did to the firm, and why he framed you. Can you handle this?" I looked him dead in the eye. "I'll do whatever it takes." Cole studied me for a second, then gave a firm nod. "We'll be listening to every word. The second anything goes sideways, we move in." I stepped out of the car and walked toward the cabin. The heavy rain had tapered off into a chilly drizzle, but the air was cold and damp, clinging to my skin like a second layer. My footsteps echoed loudly on the wooden porch planks. I raised my hand and knocked on the door. For a moment there was nothing, just the drip of rain and the distant rustle of wind through the pines. Then the latch clicked, and the door swung open. Daniel stood in the doorway. He looked utterly terrible. His face was pale and hollow, his cheeks sunken, his eyes bloodshot and rimmed with dark circles. He had lost weight, his clothes hung loosely on his frame. He looked like a man who hadn't slept in a week. For a long, agonizing moment, neither of us said a word. We just stared at each other, father and son, standing on opposite sides of a vast, unbridgeable chasm. Then Daniel broke the silence, his voice raspy and exhausted. "You actually came." I stepped inside the cabin and the door shut behind me. Now it was just the two of us. The interior looked just as I remembered. The worn hardwood floor, the heavy stone fireplace in the center of the room, the tiny kitchen in the corner. But the warmth that used to fill this space was completely gone. The air felt stagnant and cold, with heavy shadows creeping out from every corner. Daniel stood by the window, his back turned to me, staring out into the drizzle. For a long stretch, neither of us spoke. The silence stretched between us, thick and suffocating, packed with every unspoken truth from the last 3 years. Finally, Daniel turned around to face me. His eyes were hollow, his posture guarded. "I didn't think you'd show up," he said quietly. "I had to," I replied. He gestured vaguely toward the sofa. "Sit down." I walked over slowly, my legs feeling heavier with every step, and sat. Daniel took the chair across from me, leaning forward with his elbows on his knees, hands clasped tightly. We were only a few feet apart, but it felt like an ocean. I looked at him, truly looked at him, trying to find a single trace of the boy I had raised, the boy who called me his hero, the boy who promised to make us proud. But all I saw was a complete stranger. I let out a long, weary sigh, leaning back against the cushions. When I spoke, my voice was soft, heavy with surrender. "I'm done fighting, Daniel." He raised an eyebrow. "What?" "I'm done," I repeated flatly. "The board suspended me. The media has already branded me a criminal. My own legal team says the case against me is nearly impossible to beat. Even if I prove the signatures were forged, even if I prove I didn't take a dime, the damage is done. My reputation is destroyed. The firm I built for 35 years is gone." I rubbed my face with both hands, letting my sheer exhaustion show. I can't carry this anymore. Daniel was watching me intensely now, his eyes sharp and calculating. "What are you saying?" I looked at him, my expression completely blank. "I'm saying you win. I'll transfer my voting shares over to you, the entire 65%. You can have the firm. You can have all of it. I just want this nightmare to end." For a moment, Daniel didn't react. He just stared at me, trying to calculate whether I was telling the truth. Then slowly, his posture shifted. The tension drained from his shoulders, and the faint edge of a smug smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. He took the bait. "You're serious?" he asked. "Dead serious," I nodded. "I'll sign the transfer papers tomorrow. You'll have total control. I'll walk away. I'll leave New York. I'll change my name if I have to. You'll never hear from me again." Daniel leaned back in his chair, exhaling a long, slow breath. The smug triumph in his eyes was unmistakable. He looked like a man who had just won a war he'd been fighting for years. "I'm glad you finally came to your senses, Dad," he said. I forced myself to nod along. "I just need to understand one thing, Daniel. Before I sign everything over and walk away forever." His smile faded slightly. "Understand what?" "Why," I said softly, looking him straight in the eyes, "why did you do all of it? The embezzlement, the forged documents, the lies. Was it really just for the money?" Daniel's jaw tightened. "You wouldn't understand. Try me." He stood up abruptly and walked over to the hearth, staring into the cold, empty fireplace with his back to me once more. "Do you have any idea what it felt like?" he snapped, his voice sharp with resentment. "Living in your massive shadow my entire life? Every single person always comparing me to you. Robert Mitchell built an empire from scratch. Robert Mitchell is a genius. Robert Mitchell never makes a mistake." He turned around sharply, eyes burning with anger. "You made me CEO when I was 28 years old. 28. And everyone expected me to be you, to run the firm like you, make decisions like you, be flawless like you." "I never asked you to be flawless," I said quietly. "You didn't have to ask." Daniel shouted, his voice echoing off the wooden walls. It was in every single look, every conversation, every time you introduced me to a client or a board member. This is my son. He's going to take over one day. Do you have any idea how much pressure that was? Do you know what it feels like to know that no matter what you achieve, it will never be enough? I didn't interrupt. I just watched him, letting the floodgates open. So yeah, Daniel continued bitterly, I took the money, and I spent it. I gambled it away in Macau and Monaco. I stayed in five-star suites and slept with women who didn't give a damn who my father was. For the first time in my life, I felt like I wasn't living under your shadow. I felt free. And when the money ran out, you took more. Daniel let out a harsh, humorless laugh. I took more and more. And when I realized I couldn't cover my tracks anymore, I decided to make it your problem instead of mine. He walked back over and leaned down close. You built that firm, Dad. You made it what it was, but it was crushing me. So I decided to take it from you. Take everything, and you know what? It felt incredible. I stared at him, my heart breaking into 1,000 pieces. And what about your mother? Daniel's expression flickered for a split second, a shadow of remorse passing over his face before it was instantly replaced by cold, hard defiance. She was going to ruin everything, he said flatly. She was going to tell you. She was going to go to the police. I couldn't let that happen. So you had her brake lines cut. Daniel didn't answer right away. He just stared at me, his jaw set hard. I felt something shatter inside me, but I forced my voice to remain calm and even. I get it, I whispered. I really do. You felt trapped. You felt like you had no choice. Daniel blinked, caught off guard by my response. I paused, leaning in to look deep into my son's eyes. I just have one final question, Daniel, and then I'll sign it all over to you. Just give me the honest truth. Did you take your mother's life? The question hung heavily in the air between us, freezing the room. For a long time, Daniel didn't move a muscle. He just stared at me with an unreadable, dark expression. Then slowly, a cold smile spread across his face. It wasn't the warm smile of the boy in the photograph, nor was it the nervous smile he used to give when he was unsure of himself. It was a cold, hollow, remorseless smile of a man who believed he was entirely invincible. Yes, he said simply. The word hit me like a physical punch to the chest. The air rushed out of my lungs. I had known the truth deep down, but hearing him say it out loud made it real in a way that destroyed me completely. Why? I whispered, tears welling in my eyes. Daniel leaned back, crossing his arms, his tone almost conversational. Because Mom was too righteous for her own good. She was too noble. She found the $5 million I took, and instead of coming to me or trying to help me, she hired a private investigator. She gathered records. She was going to the police the very next morning. He shook his head as if the memory annoyed him. She was going to destroy everything. My career, my future, my reputation. Over $5 million. That was pocket change compared to what I was building. I stared at him, my hands trembling violently. So you put a stop to her? I had to, Daniel said calmly, as if discussing a routine business transaction. I hired Eddie Torres. 15 grand in cash. He cut her brake lines. Not enough to fail instantly, but enough to give out under hard pressure. I waited for a rainy night, because I knew Mom always drove too fast in the rain. She was always so confident behind the wheel. He paused, his eyes drifting away. She hit that pole on Route 9 hard. The airbags popped, but the impact tore her apart. She was dead before the ambulance even got there. He said it so casually, so cold-bloodedly, as if he were describing the weather. You made me believe it was an accident, I gasped, my voice fracturing. For 3 years you let me blame the rain, the roads, and myself for not being there. It was an accident, Daniel interrupted sharply. As far as the law was concerned, nobody suspected a thing. The cops wrote it off as a tragic wreck due to slick conditions and speed. Eddie disposed of his tools. I paid him off, and the evidence vanished into thin air. And me? He met my gaze with dead, icy eyes. You mourned her. You buried her. And you kept moving forward, exactly like I needed you to. A wave of bile rose in my throat. And then you kept going. You didn't stop at $5 million. You stole $47 million. You forged my name on legal contracts. You set up a massive frame job to throw me in prison for the rest of my life." Daniel's smile widened into a full sneer. "Of course I did. Why stop once Mom was out of the way? Nobody was left to catch me. You were too buried in your grief to notice a single thing I was doing. I had total operational control, so I took full advantage of it." He stood up and began pacing toward the window. "I funneled funds through shell entities. I set up offshore accounts in the Caymans. I forged your signature on every document, so the paper trail led straight to your desk. I spent years building the perfect trap. And when the time was right, I dumped my car right off your dock, because I knew you'd be the one to find it. I knew you'd call 911, making you the primary suspect from day one." He turned back to face me, his face glowing with arrogant triumph. "It was brilliant. If everything went according to plan, you'd be sitting in a federal cell right now, and I'd be holding the keys to Mitchell Financial Group. Your controlling stake, your money, your power." I felt the last piece of my heart break into dust. "What about our family?" I choked out. "What about all those years we spent together? The summers in this very cabin? The promises you made to your mother?" Daniel's face didn't soften for even a fraction of a second. "I don't need a family, Dad. I never did. Family is just dead weight, an obligation holding you back. I needed power, and I needed wealth, and I was willing to do whatever it took to get them." He stared at me with empty, cold eyes. "You and Mom got in my way, so I removed you." I slowly pushed myself up from the sofa, my legs trembling beneath me. Hot tears spilled over my eyelids, rolling uncontrollably down my face. I didn't bother wiping them away. "Do you know what hurts the most, Daniel?" I asked, my voice cracking with overwhelming grief. "It isn't that you stole from me, or that you tried to send me to prison, or even that you ruined my life's work." I looked at him through blurry eyes. "What destroys me is knowing that I failed as a father. I failed to teach you how to be a decent human being. I failed to make you understand that honor and integrity matter more than money. I failed you." Daniel stared at me, his arrogant smile flickering for just a split second as a shadow of doubt crossed his face. But he quickly recovered, flashing that same cold, defiant sneer. "You didn't fail, Dad," he whispered. "I just chose a different path." I shook my head slowly, wiping my face with the back of my hand. "No, Daniel, you chose a monstrous path, and now you're going to pay for it." Daniel frowned, confused. "What are you talking about?" I didn't say another word. Right on cue, the heavy wooden door of the cabin was kicked wide open. Federal agents poured into the room, led by Agent Cole and Detective Mitchell, accompanied by a dozen heavily armed FBI SWAT officers. They moved with terrifying speed and precision, weapons drawn, shouting commands that rattled the cabin walls. "Daniel Mitchell, FBI, hands where we can see them. You are under arrest for federal wire fraud, embezzlement, corporate conspiracy, and the murder of Catherine Mitchell. You have the right to remain silent." Daniel's face went ghastly pale. His eyes snapped over to me, wide with utter shock and disbelief. "What?" His voice cracked. "What did you do?" I looked at him, my expression settling into a cold, unbreakable calm. "I recorded every word," I said softly. "Every single confession, the embezzlement, the forged signatures, Eddie Torres, cutting the brake lines, and your plan to frame me. The FBI heard every word." Daniel stumbled backward, his mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. His eyes darted frantically around the room, searching for an escape route that wasn't there. SWAT officers slammed him against the wall and forced his arms behind his back, clicking the steel handcuffs tightly around his wrists. As the reality of the trap set in, Daniel completely shattered, sobbing and screaming incoherently as he was dragged out into the rain. I stood alone in the center of that old cabin, shivering uncontrollably. Through the window, I watched the agents march Daniel down the path toward the waiting police cruisers. He walked with his head hung low, offered no resistance, and said nothing more. He walked like a man who finally realized his path had led straight into a dark, inescapable cell. Agent Cole lingered by the doorway to give me space while Detective Mitchell coordinated the transport outside. but I barely heard the commotion. The only thing echoing in my head was Daniel's ice-cold voice. I don't need a family. I never did. My legs finally gave out. I collapsed onto the sofa, buried my face in my hands, and wept uncontrollably. I cried for Catherine, the brilliant, loving woman stolen from me by our own child. I cried for the boy Daniel used to be, the innocent child who called me his hero and promised to make us proud. And I wept for the hollow monster he had become, destroying everything we had built. Where did we go wrong? How did greed poison his soul so completely? I didn't know, and I knew I would spend the rest of my days searching for answers I would never find. The days that followed passed in a surreal blur. The media outlets that had demonized me just a week earlier flipped their narrative overnight. Headlines that once read, "Robert Mitchell, corporate fraud," were replaced with "Daniel Mitchell, America's most ruthless son." Outlets dissected his crimes, his chilling lack of remorse, and his cold-blooded obsession with wealth, branding him a monster who had destroyed his own blood. The board of directors called an emergency meeting and sent a formal letter of apology printed on corporate letterhead, signed by every single member. They admitted to acting prematurely, suspending my authority without waiting for the facts, and begged me to return as chairman and CEO to save the firm's reputation. I turned them down without hesitation. I couldn't go back, not now, maybe not ever. The company I had spent 35 years building felt utterly contaminated, poisoned by Daniel's web of lies. Every hallway, every boardroom, and every contract carried the dark stain of his betrayal. Instead, I asked Thomas Parker to step in as interim CEO. He hesitated at first, reluctant to step into the intense spotlight, but I convinced him. I told him the firm desperately needed a leader with unwavering integrity, someone who understood the real meaning of honor. He accepted. A week after Daniel's arrest, I began meeting with his victims. There were over 200 of them, working-class families who had lost their life savings, retirees whose pensions had been wiped out, and small business owners who had trusted Mitchell Financial Group with their livelihoods. I met them one by one in quiet conference rooms and coffee shops, listening to every single story. One afternoon, a 70-year-old woman named Margaret Wilson sat across from me, her hands trembling as tears welled in her eyes. She had lost $340,000. Her husband, George, had been battling aggressive cancer for 2 years, and their medical bills were piling up fast. They had trusted Daniel to manage their life savings safely. "We thought we were doing the right thing, Mr. Mitchell," Margaret choked out, wiping her eyes with a tissue. "We thought your firm was safe." I couldn't look her in the eye. "I'm so deeply sorry, Mrs. Wilson. There are no words to express how sorry I am." She nodded softly. "I know it wasn't your fault, Mr. Mitchell. I know that now. But my husband, he's getting worse. Without that money, I don't know how we're going to survive." I reached across the table and took her trembling hands in mine. "I'm going to make this right," I promised. "I will personally ensure that every single person hurt by my son is made whole." She looked at me with a mix of fragile hope and disbelief. "Can you really do that?" "I don't know how long it will take," I said honestly, "but I will give everything I have to make it happen." That night, I sat in my study staring at the financial ledgers Thomas had compiled. The total amount Daniel had stolen was staggering. $47 million stolen from over 200 clients. The firm's insurance policies would cover a portion, but nowhere near enough to make everyone whole. I pulled out a notepad and ran the numbers. If I liquidated all my personal assets, my estate, my private investment portfolio, and my entire 65% equity stake in Mitchell Financial Group, I could raise nearly $110 million. It would be enough to fully reimburse every single victim, with enough left over to establish a permanent restitution fund for any additional claims. It would also leave me with practically nothing to my name, but it was the only honorable path forward. I picked up the phone and dialed my attorney, Jonathan Pierce. "Jonathan," I said, my voice steady and firm, "I want you to sell everything, liquidate my estate, my entire portfolio, and all my shares in Mitchell Financial. I want every single cent placed into a restitution trust for Daniel's victims. Every last penny. The line went cold and quiet for what felt like an eternity. "Robert," Jonathan said, his voice dropping into a guarded, cautious whisper, "are you absolutely sure about this? You spent 35 years of your life building that fortune from nothing." "I'm certain, Jonathan," I said, my voice steady. "It's what Catherine would have wanted me to do." Jonathan let out a heavy sigh through the receiver. "All right, I'll start drafting the liquidation papers right away." After hanging up, I walked over to the fireplace and picked up the faded photograph I'd been staring at for days. That afternoon at Lake Placid back in 1994, Catherine, Daniel, and I were standing on the wooden dock, smiling as if we didn't have a single care in the world. I gently ran my thumb over Catherine's face, then over Daniel's. The boy in that photo looked so innocent, so full of pure potential. What happened to him? At what point did he slip away? I closed my eyes and tears burned down my cheeks once more. "Where did we go wrong, Catherine?" I whispered into the empty room. "Where did we fail him?" No answer came. There was only the heavy, suffocating silence of a vacant house, and the crushing weight of a question I knew I'd be asking myself for the rest of my life. I spent the next 6 months living through the longest, most painful days of my life. Every week I sat in Jonathan Pierce's high-rise office in Manhattan alongside Agent Cole, meticulously building the prosecution's case brick by brick. We reviewed bank ledgers, forensic reports, wire transfers, and sworn statements, preparing for every possible angle the defense might throw at us. Jonathan was ruthless and methodical. In his 50s, with steel-gray hair and sharp eyes that missed nothing, he had spent decades prosecuting complex financial crimes and knew exactly how to tear a defense apart. Yet even he admitted this case carried an eerie, tragic weight. "Your son is going to hire the most expensive defense team money can buy," Jonathan warned one afternoon, tapping a pen against a thick stack of motions. "They're going to argue diminished capacity, extreme stress, or temporary insanity. They'll try to spin him as a victim of corporate burnout." "Can they win with that?" I asked. Jonathan shook his head firmly. "Not with your recorded confession, not with Eddie Torres taking the stand, and certainly not with Dr. Cooper's forensic proof of the forged signatures. But they will make it a grueling fight, and juries can always be unpredictable." Eddie Torres had officially agreed to cooperate with federal prosecutors in exchange for a plea deal. Arrested the same night as Daniel, he faced charges as an accessory to Catherine's death. His legal team negotiated a deal where, in exchange for a full confession detailing how Daniel paid him to sabotage the vehicle, his sentence would be reduced from 25 years down to 5. I hated the thought of it. It sickened me that the man who physically cut my wife's brake lines would walk free in 5 years. But Agent Cole assured me it was indispensable. Without Torres's direct testimony, proving Daniel's intent in a murder charge would be an uphill battle. Above all else, I needed Daniel held accountable. I needed the full truth exposed to the light of day. So I accepted it. The nights were the hardest part. Sleep completely evaded me. Whenever I closed my eyes, I didn't just see the cold, remorseless man who admitted to killing his mother. I saw the boy he used to be, the 8-year-old holding up his first catch, the teenager sitting by the fire at Lake Placid, promising to make us proud. I couldn't stop wondering when the shift happened. When did the sweet boy I raised morph into a cold-blooded stranger? One night, lying awake staring at the ceiling, a memory surfaced with crystal clarity. Daniel was 16 back in the summer of 2001, right after he got his driver's license. Catherine and I had bought him a used Honda Civic. Nothing fancy, but he was thrilled. A few weeks later, I noticed $500 missing from my wallet. I confronted Daniel directly. He looked me dead in the eye and swore he had no idea what happened to it, but I saw the telltale signs of a lie, the subtle fidgeting of his hands, the slight tremor in his voice. Catherine wanted to enforce real consequences. She wanted to take his keys away and ground him for the entire summer. But I stepped in and softened the blow. "He's a good kid," I told her back then. "He just made a mistake. We just need to talk to him." So we sat him down, and I gave him a gentle lecture on honesty, trust, and responsibility. Daniel nodded, apologized, and promised it would never happen again. And I believed him. Looking back, I realized that was the turning point. That was the moment I should have held the line. I should have made him face real accountability, instead of brushing it aside as a harmless teenage phase. Maybe if I had been firmer, things would have turned out differently. Or maybe it wouldn't have changed a thing. I'll never know. By February, Daniel's lead attorney, Richard Lawson, a high-profile defense lawyer known for getting wealthy clients off the hook, approached Jonathan with a proposed plea bargain. Daniel would plead guilty to the financial fraud and embezzlement charges if prosecutors dropped all counts related to Catherine's death, capping his sentence at 15 years instead of life without parole. Jonathan called me the moment the offer came in. "What are your thoughts, Robert?" "No," I answered instantly. "Robert, 15 years is a substantial sentence, and a trial will be brutal." "No," I repeated, my tone unwavering. "The truth needs to come out in open court. All of it. What he did to Catherine, what he did to the firm, and how he tried to frame me. I want it on the public record so the world sees exactly what he chose to do." Jonathan was quiet for a moment, then exhaled slowly. "Understood. I'll inform Lawson the deal is rejected." "Thank you, Jonathan. Just be prepared, Robert," he added gently. "A full trial means every painful detail will be dissected by the media. It's going to be relentless." "I know," I said, "but it's the only right way forward. Catherine deserved justice. The victims deserved justice. And Daniel needed to stand before the full measure of his choices." The trial was set for April 15th, 2024. The evening before jury selection, as I sat in my study, reviewing my notes one final time, the doorbell rang. I opened it to find a courier holding a small overnight envelope. "Delivery for Robert Mitchell," he said. I signed the pad and closed the door. The envelope was plain white, with my name written across the front in neat, distinct handwriting. I recognized it instantly. It was Daniel's script. I stared at it for a long time, my pulse quickening, before carrying it back to my desk. It was a letter sent from the detention center where he was being held ahead of trial. I held it in my hands, turning it over. Part of me wanted to tear it open to see what he had to say, but a larger part of me shrank away from reading his excuses, his rationalizations, or his lies. I set the letter on my desk, unopened. On the morning of the trial, I woke up at 5 a.m. under a dark, heavy sky. I hadn't slept at all. Every time I shut my eyes, I saw Catherine's face, heard Daniel's detached confession at the cabin, and felt the crushing weight of everything that had been dismantled. I put on a dark suit, tied my tie, and waited. Jonathan picked me up at 7 a.m., and we drove to the Manhattan Criminal Court in total silence. The perimeter was surrounded by media trucks, photographers, and crowds of onlookers. Court security had to clear a path to escort us through the doors. Inside, the courtroom was packed to capacity. Victims of the financial scheme filled the benches, while journalists lined the side aisles. At the front, Judge Patricia Harmon presided over the bench, a stern, sharp-eyed woman with silver hair and a reputation for zero tolerance in her courtroom. Then the bailiffs escorted Daniel inside. He was wearing an orange jumpsuit, his wrists shackled in front of him. He looked gaunt and visibly aged, having lost 20 or 30 pounds. He looked like a complete shadow of the man I once knew. Our eyes met for a brief, agonizing second before he turned his head away. Judge Harmon struck her gavel. The state of New York versus Daniel Robert Mitchell is now in session. Lead prosecutor Lisa Hammond stood up. She was a seasoned attorney in her early 40s, known for her sharp, methodical approach to white-collar prosecution. She had spent months working directly with the FBI to structure the case. "Your Honor, members of the jury," Hammond began, facing the box, "the prosecution will demonstrate that the defendant, Daniel Mitchell, engaged in a cold, calculated, multi-year conspiracy. He embezzled $47 million from client trust accounts, paid over $2 million in bribes to officials, committed massive tax fraud, and, most monstrously, orchestrated the murder of his own mother, Catherine Mitchell, to cover his tracks. When his scheme began to collapse, he attempted to frame his father, Robert Mitchell, through forged legal documents and planted evidence. the state has filed 73 formal counts, including first-degree murder, grand larceny, fraud, and obstruction of justice. A quiet murmur rippled across the gallery before Judge Harmon gave a sharp tap of her gavel. We will present forensic documentation, financial paper trails, witness testimony, and a recorded confession in the defendant's own voice, Hammond continued, turning to look directly at Daniel. The evidence will prove that Daniel Mitchell is not a victim or a whistleblower, but a ruthless actor who destroyed lives and betrayed his family for personal gain. She took her seat, and defense attorney Richard Lawson stood up. Tall, polished, and oozing confidence, he approached the jury box with an easy smile. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," Lawson said smoothly, "my client is not a monster. He is a young executive who cracked under immense, unnatural pressure and made terrible errors in judgment. Yes, financial irregularities occurred. Yes, poor choices were made. But the prosecution's claim that he intentionally caused his mother's death relies on circumstantial assumptions, coerced testimony, and a grieving father's bitter narrative. We will show that Daniel acted out of desperation and panic, not calculated malice, and that the alleged confession was the result of deliberate manipulation." Lawson returned to his bench. Judge Harmon nodded to the prosecution. "Call your first witness." "The state calls Edward Torres," Hammond announced. Eddie Torres was led to the stand. He looked terrified, taking the oath with shaking hands. Under questioning, he detailed how, in August of 2020, Daniel had paid him $15,000 in cash to cut the brake lines on Catherine's Honda Accord. He walked the court through the meeting, the cash payment, and how he completed the sabotage without asking questions. "Did you know whose car it was at the time?" Hammond asked. "No, ma'am," Torres mumbled, looking down at his lap. "Not until I saw the news report about Mrs. Mitchell's fatal crash the next day. That's when I realized what I'd done." "Why are you testifying today?" Torres swallowed hard. "Because I couldn't live with the guilt anymore. What I did was monstrous. I need to take responsibility." Next, the prosecution called Dr. Helen Cooper, the forensic document examiner. She brought up high magnification displays showing how the signatures on the fraudulent contracts were digitally lifted from my genuine signature and edited onto the legal documents. She highlighted the pixelation artifacts, the uniform ink density, and the complete lack of natural pressure variations. "In my professional opinion," Dr. Cooper concluded, "these signatures were mechanically fabricated. Robert Mitchell did not sign these papers." Special Agent Marcus Cole took the stand next, walking the jury through the federal paper trail, the $12 million discovered in Cayman Islands shell accounts, and the vehicle telemetry from Daniel's Mercedes. "Agent Cole," Hammond asked, "can you clarify the ownership details of the vehicle recovered from the river?" The 2020 Mercedes S-Class was registered under Daniel Mitchell's name, but Robert Mitchell was listed as a co-owner because he co-signed the loan, Cole explained. "That joint ownership gave us lawful access to the car's built-in GPS telemetry and maintenance records. The onboard logs confirmed the car was driven directly from Daniel's Manhattan high-rise to Robert Mitchell's dock on the night in question, with Daniel's personal cell phone tracking alongside the vehicle the entire way." Cole then played the audio recorded inside the cabin at Lake Placid. The entire courtroom fell deathly silent as Daniel's voice echoed through the speakers. "I don't need a family, Dad. I needed power and I needed wealth, and I was willing to do whatever it took to get them." Gasps broke out across the gallery. Several victims sitting in the front rows began weeping quietly. "The state calls Thomas Parker," Hammond said. Thomas walked up to the witness stand, his shoulders tight with tension. Dressed in a modest gray suit, he took the oath and sat down, his face solemn. "Mr. Parker, please state your role for the record," Hammond requested. "I served as chief operating officer at Mitchell Financial Group for 15 years, Thomas stated clearly. "I worked alongside Robert Mitchell and later reported to Daniel when he took over." "Did you observe any financial red flags during your tenure under Daniel Mitchell?" "Yes," Thomas testified. "Roughly 2 years ago, I caught significant discrepancies in our ledgers. Large sums were moving through unverified shell companies. When I brought it to Daniel, he dismissed it as confidential restructurings. But as I kept digging, the numbers made no sense. Hammond handed him a folder of verified documents. "What did your internal investigation reveal?" Thomas opened the file, his jaw setting tight. Daniel was living a double life far beyond his executive salary. I recovered erased personal records showing massive compulsive gambling losses. In a single night at a casino in Macau, he lost over $3 million. Low murmurs spread through the gallery before the judge called for order. $3 million in one night? Hammond echoed. Over 4 years, Daniel squandered nearly $10 million on high-stakes gambling across Las Vegas, Monaco, and Macau, Thomas explained. He funded his lifestyle by skimming directly from client trust accounts. Hammond produced another exhibit. "Did you discover other unauthorized expenditures?" "Yes," Thomas said firmly. He funneled over $20,000 a month to a high-end escort service in Manhattan, paying for luxury apartments and credit expenses using stolen firm capital. A heavy quiet settled over the room. Hammond held up a printed email thread. "Do you recognize this correspondence?" Thomas scanned the page. "That is an email sent from Daniel to Eddie Torres, dated 1 week before Catherine Mitchell's death. Please read the subject line and body for the jury." Thomas read aloud in a steady voice. Subject: Final payment confirmed. Body: Eddie, the issue will be handled as discussed. 15,000 cash upon completion. Make sure nothing traces back. I need this clean. The gallery erupted into noise. Judge Harmon pounded her gavel repeatedly. "Silence in the court!" When quiet was restored, Hammond asked, "What did the issue refer to?" Thomas met Daniel's cold stare directly. His mother, Catherine. She had uncovered his initial embezzlement and told him she was going to the police the following morning. He had her killed to keep her quiet. Daniel's face turned paper white, his hands clenching into tight fists on the defense table. "Did Daniel ever attempt to bribe you to withhold this evidence?" Hammond asked. "Yes," Thomas answered clearly. 3 months ago, his legal representatives offered me $500,000 to stay silent and claim the files were corrupted. I refused. Catherine Mitchell deserved the truth, and so do the families he ruined. Thank you, Mr. Parker. No further questions. Lawson's cross-examination failed to break Thomas's timeline or credibility. When Thomas stepped down, Hammond turned to the bench. "The state calls Robert Mitchell." My heart hammered against my ribs as I walked up to the stand, placed my hand on the Bible, and swore to tell the truth. The courtroom was pin-drop silent. Every eye was locked on me. The emotional weight pressed down on my chest, making it hard to catch my breath, but I forced myself to sit tall and face my son. Daniel sat in his orange jumpsuit, hands folded, completely expressionless. He didn't look away, and neither did I. Lisa Hammond stepped toward the witness stand, her tone respectful and measured. "Mr. Mitchell, thank you for being here. I know this is an unbearable position for a parent." I gave a faint nod. "Before we go into the events of October, I have to ask you directly. Do you love your son?" I swallowed the lump in my throat. "Yes," I said quietly. "I love my son with all my heart." Hammond let the words settle in the air. "Then why are you testifying against him today?" I looked over at Daniel, then back to the prosecutor. "Because I love him," I said softly. "And true love does not mean protecting someone from the consequences of horrific crimes. Justice matters more." Judge Harmon lightly tapped her gavel to quell the quiet whispers in the gallery. "Mr. Mitchell, please describe what you witnessed on the night of October 12th at your private dock." I took a slow, deep breath. Around 9 p.m., I was fishing off my dock on the Hudson. I heard an engine revving violently from the access road behind the trees. A black Mercedes S-Class came tearing down the dirt lane with its headlights off. It smashed through the guardrail and went nose first into the river. My voice cracked slightly. I recognized the license plate immediately. It was my son's car. What did you do next? I rowed out in my small boat and dialed 911. When I reached the car, the front doors were wide open and the engine was underwater, but no one was inside. Then I looked toward the bank. Daniel was standing there, watching it sink. We locked eyes across the water, and then he turned and ran into the woods, getting into an idling sedan and speeding away. Hammond nodded grimly. And what did you find inside the safe recovered from that vehicle? 3 flash drives, financial ledgers, 50,000 in cash, and an envelope labeled Catherine. The proof. Inside was a voice recording Catherine made a week before she died, confronting Daniel about stealing $5 million from the firm. She told him she was going to the police, and his response was ice cold. I paused, my throat aching with grief. And there were forensic photos showing the brake lines on her car had been deliberately cut. Hammond allowed a long pause before asking her final question. And what happened when you confronted Daniel at the cabin in Lake Placid? I closed my eyes, briefly seeing the rain hitting the cabin windows. I offered to surrender everything, my shares, my reputation, my freedom, just to hear the truth. And he admitted to all of it. He admitted paying Eddie Torres $15,000 to cut Catherine's brakes. He admitted forging my signatures to frame me for his embezzlement. He sat there in the cabin where we used to spend summers when he was a boy, and he told me he didn't care about family, only money and power. Tears slipped down my face, but I didn't wipe them away. In that moment, I realized the boy I raised was truly gone. Hammond gave a quiet nod of thanks and turned. Your witness. Richard Lawson stood up, adjusting his suit jacket, and approached the stand with a sharp, skeptical posture. Mr. Mitchell, you've painted a very dramatic picture here today, Lawson began, his tone biting. But let's speak frankly. Isn't it true that your testimony today isn't driven by a desire for justice, but by a deep desire for revenge? I looked at him surprised. Revenge? Yes, revenge, Lawson pressed, stepping closer. Your son publicly exposed your firm's collapse. Your reputation was tarnished. Your company's stock crashed by 40%, and the board stripped you of your authority. You came here today to punish him for humiliating you on national television, didn't you? The courtroom was deathly quiet. I looked past Lawson, locking eyes with Daniel. No, I said firmly, that isn't true. Isn't it? Lawson pushed. You expect this jury to believe a father whose reputation was dragged through the mud wouldn't harbor immense bitterness? I met his gaze without flinching. My son tried to frame me for crimes I didn't commit, and my life's work was destroyed. But I am not sitting here out of anger. I am here because my wife, Catherine, deserves justice. The 200 families who lost their life savings deserve justice. And Daniel needs to face the reality of what he has done. Lawson narrowed his eyes slightly, realized he wasn't going to break me, and turned back to his table. No further questions. You may step down, Mr. Mitchell, Judge Harmon said. I stood up slowly, my legs heavy, and walked past the jury box and prosecution table. As I passed the defense bench, Daniel looked up at me. His eyes were bloodshot, his face hollow. He leaned forward slightly, whispering in a voice meant only for me, I hate you, Dad. I stopped in my tracks. For a second, time stood still. Then I looked down at him with quiet sorrow. I know, I whispered back, but I still love you. Daniel's expression twisted in anger, and he jerked his head away. I walked back to my seat beside Jonathan, my heart aching for the son I had lost. The jury deliberated for just 2 hours. When they filed back into the room, Judge Harmon asked them to stand. Has the jury reached a verdict? The forewoman stood tall. We have, Your Honor. On count 1, conspiracy to commit murder in the death of Catherine Mitchell, how do you find? Guilty. On count 2, grand larceny in the amount of $47 million, how do you find? Guilty. 73 counts were read, one by one. The answer was the same for every single one. Guilty. Judge Harmon turned to Daniel. Daniel Mitchell, you have been convicted of heinous crimes against your family, your firm, and the state. I sentence you to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. Daniel sat completely motionless. He didn't cry, he didn't utter a word. As the bailiffs placed heavy steel cuffs around his wrists and led him out toward the holding cells, he walked like a man whose world had finally collapsed into total darkness. As he passed my row, he didn't look up again. Outside the courthouse, crowd reactions blurred together, but Margaret Wilson, the 70-year-old woman whose husband was fighting cancer, came up and embraced me tightly. Thank you for doing the hard thing, Mr. Mitchell, she sobbed. Thank you for choosing the truth. 6 months later, in October of 2024, the liquidation of my personal assets was finalized. yielding $110 million. Every single victim of Daniel's fraud was compensated 100% of their losses through the Catherine Mitchell Restitution Fund. Margaret Wilson received her $340,000 back in full, allowing her husband to receive his treatments without fear of ruin. Thomas Parker officially took over as CEO of Mitchell Financial Group, slowly rebuilding the firm on a foundation of absolute transparency and honor. Over the next 2 years, letters began arriving from the maximum security facility where Daniel was serving his life sentence. At first, they were short, defensive, and bitter, but as time wore on, his tone slowly began to shift. In January of 2026, his 27th letter arrived on a freezing winter morning. I sat in my study, watching snow fall gently over the garden outside, and opened it. "Dad, I spend a lot of time thinking about the cabin at Lake Placid, and that summer when I was 8 years old. I remember telling you that you were my hero. I remember Mom telling me that honor mattered more than money or success. I broke every promise I ever made to both of you. I don't expect you to forgive me, but I need you to know that I finally understand the horror of what I did. I destroyed Mom, I tried to destroy you, and I ruined innocent lives. Thank you for not enabling my evil. Choosing justice was the only thing that could have ever stopped me. Daniel." I set the letter down, picked up a pen, and wrote a short reply. "Daniel, forgiveness is a long road, but seeing you take responsibility is a start. Your mother believed that true honor means facing your mistakes, no matter how terrible they are. I am still praying for your soul." "Dad." I sealed the envelope and walked over to the window. The snow covered the rose garden Catherine had planted so many years ago, quiet, pure, and still. Greed and unchecked ambition will always lead to ruin, but facing the truth is the only way healing ever begins. Sometimes loving someone truly means letting them face the full weight of their choices so they have a chance at genuine redemption. If this story resonated with you, please consider sharing your thoughts in the comments below and subscribe for more stories.